YouTube viewers. Today I'm rebuilding this 32 millimeter Bing CV carburetor, constant velocity carb. This is an older carburetor from the mid-70s. They were used on early BMW airhead motorcycles. And this carb is going on a 1971 BMW R75/5 that I'm currently working on. And these carburetors are over 40 years old, and if they haven't been restored or rebuilt, then you can be sure the O-rings are hard and cracked. Bolts will be seized, jets might be seized due to galvanic corrosion, and overall they're just, unless they've been taken care of, they're not a fun project to undertake. There's two of them that go on this R75 BMW, and I just finished rebuilding the first one, and this one had, most of the bolts were seized due to galvanic corrosion, and two of the jets were seized, the idle speed jet and the main jet holder, which is a large brass screw. I'll show you in a minute. They were both heavily seized, and it took me a while to get them out. So I thought I'd make a short video going into detail how to rebuild one of these. This is about the fourth one of these Bings I've rebuilt. And just show you a couple of tricks if you run into problems with seized bolts, and just show the process. Okay, if you're rebuilding one of these carburetors, it's always a good idea if you have two of them to do them one at a time. That way you can you won't get lost. You'll know you can go back and just replace the components like they are on the other one. I've actually already loosened some of these bolts just to see what kind of shape this carb was in, and it's actually in much better shape than the first one. This one doesn't appear to have too many seized bolts. So obviously I should have made the video with this first carburetor, which just about drove me insane. But anyway, I'll show you some tricks that I used on the other one, even though this one doesn't really need it. All these metal pieces, the metal brackets, I usually, when I take these off, I put them in a jar of vinegar here. I let the vinegar soak into the metal, the steel, and basically eat away all the rust, dirt. Vinegar is a weak acid. It's pretty good for removing rust. It works pretty slow though. I usually have to leave these parts in the vinegar for at least 2 days. You can see these things are pretty rusty and grungy. For a 40-plus-year-old carb, you gotta expect that. All these bolts will be replaced with stainless steel hardware as part of a kit I purchased. Washer. This is actually the choke on the carburetor. Bing uses a interesting setup for the choke. It's almost like another small carburetor on the body of the main carb. But there's one of the O-rings you have to replace right in there. Okay. This is the idle speed set screw. There's no O-ring at all on that one. This is I think the pilot jet. Yeah, there's one of the O-rings. It's pretty dry. It's not as bad as a lot of them I've seen though. Okay, the floats are held in a little bar here, and there's one knurled in on the bar. It's usually opposite of the fuel intake, so it's usually opposite on this side, but honestly the other one had the knurled in on this side, so. The kit comes with new floats as well, so I won't be using any of this or the floats. They don't look half bad, but the kit comes with new floats, so I'm going to use them. If you're worried about your floats, you can float them in a thing of kerosene just to see if they still float. Kit comes with a new float valve as well. Into the vinegar. I can't believe how easy these jets are coming out. If I had made a video of the other carburetor though, he'd probably been banned by YouTube because there's been a lot of cuss words used. Yeah, that's, yeah. Okay, there's another one of the O-rings, and this is usually the jet that seized the most. It's basically a huge hunk of brass that fits down in the gasoline, and you get a lot of galvanic corrosion over the years that just gets in there between the different types of metal, the aluminum and the brass, and it just really corrodes it. It's out of 4 of these carburetors I've built, 3 of these had a very seized brass jet holder. And you can see why. That's a lot of threads to get corroded, and then once it's severely corroded, it's really hard to get out of there. I'll show you a trick that I use to get the jet holder out of the other one. Yeah, I'll go ahead and put it back in because I'm at least going to simulate how to do that. Again, these are aluminum threads, so you don't want to really torque on anything. And since I've already tried, I know these top bolts are severely seized. Yeah, I don't want to I don't want to damage the slot and these slot head nuts, bolts too much. So I'll move on to what I use to free up these C's nuts. I'll show you what I've been using lately. It seems to work much better than plain old penetrating fluid. Next. Okay, you might have heard that some company did some study, and apparently a mixture of ATF and acetone works better as a penetrating oil than Kroll, PB Blaster, or any of the commercial penetrating oils. I decided to try this myself because I basically had some ATF around, and I had some MEC, which is very similar to acetone, in my shop, so I just went with what I had, mixed these two together in a 50-50 concentration, and it seems to work great. I think I'm going to start using this from now on. And the only problem with this is, well, you need a metal container. MEC is just like acetone, it'll eat through plastic slowly, so you need to make this mixture in a metal container, which, believe it or not, these little oil cans are getting hard to come by. I found this online though. It's made by a US company. I don't want this to be a product ad, but this is working great. And I recommend this type oil can though, because as you can see, it's even seeping up through the mouth of the thing, so it's pretty good penetrating oil. And I like MEC better than acetone. The two solvents are very similar. The only difference is MEC takes longer to evaporate, which it's what I had, and also I think it'll work better than acetone because you want your penetrating oil to soak into threads and not evaporate rapidly. So this is working out for me. I just thought I'd mention that because this is what I'm going to show you, how I break loose these bolts on this old carburetor. Okay, back to these bolts. Basically you're going to use three things to break these seized bolt heads off, or break the bolts loose, not off. But you're going to need a good penetrating oil, which I just talked about. Much cheaper than PB Blaster or Kroll, by the way. And you're going to need a good impact wrench. If you don't have one of these in your toolbox, this is fairly new, and I found it to be great. I can't do without it now. It makes breaking off tough nuts and bolts really easy. So I said three things. You'll need penetrating oil, impact wrench, and heat, as usual. Most of the time when you're dealing with aluminum, heat helps. Heat is very conductive. When you heat it, it expands faster than the steel. So you heat this aluminum, it will expand slightly and allow your penetrating oil to seep in around the steel bolt. And by heat, if you're using this type of penetrating oil, you do not want to use a torch. The solvent, acetone, MEC, is highly flammable, and you want to rebuild your carburetor, not burn it. Although this other one, I came very tempted on more than one occasion. Anyway, I'm going to pour a little bit of this in here, this acetone MEC mix. Let it seep in for at least an hour. And I'm also going to heat the body of this up with a hair dryer. I prefer a hair dryer. It gets hot enough for this stuff. Okay, once you've allowed enough time for your penetrating oil to soak in around the bolts, you've heated the aluminum housing, you're ready to try the impact wrench to break these bolts loose. This is where you hold your breath because you it's easy to damage the carburetor. It's usually not a good idea to hammer on a carb, but this to me seems to be is the only way I've found to get these seized bolts loose. It's going to be tough to do with a hammer, wrench, carb, and me having only 2 arms and hands. But here goes. So, yeah. There we go. It's easier to do with a vise, but you go with what you have, huh? Honestly, I think that penetrating oil did the trick. I could probably break these loose with just a screwdriver. I'm constantly amazed by this ATF Mac mix. Yeah, there we go. Okay, see these bolts are out. This is the diaphragm. Basically, these CV carbs, they don't have a direct connection to the needle valve. They basically use vacuum. Basically, it depends on the speed of the engine by how much. As you open the butterfly valve, this goes up. It increases vacuum through the head of this thing, head of this CV carb, which creates a vacuum. Sucks this up. So the more you open the butterfly valve with the throttle, the more vacuum is created. It also pulls up the needle. So with a CV carb, you get a little bit of a delay, but not much. It actually is more reliable given altitude differences, and for a cruising bike, it's just smoother power delivery. I like them. Okay, the kit comes with a new needle and a new diaphragm. The needle is basically held in. There's two. You can't see there now, but there's 2 little wires that hook onto grooves in the top of this needle. So you remove the needle by twisting it slightly and pulling. You'll hear 1 click, 2 clicks, twisting it maybe, I don't know, 30 degrees, and pull down. There. Okay, now that you've got the carburetor mostly apart, one of the main problems I've found with these old Bings is this needle jet holder. It's a huge piece of brass. It holds the main jet and the jet down in there, and it's part of a brass stack, and it's a big piece of brass. It gets really corroded if it's never been serviced. and it's almost impossible to get out of here if it's heavily seized. One of these, I had to drill it out. I basically used a drill, drilled out through the center. I measured from another carburetor exactly how low I can go without hitting the other jet. And I just kept using progressively larger drill bits until I basically could see, look down in there, and I could see the little aluminum threads starting to show through. And then I took a pick and just picked the brass threads, picked the rest of it out. That took me forever. It was pretty much a day's worth of work. And I ended up damaging some of the threads, aluminum threads anyway. I could still use the carb because I had another one of these and I was able, there's enough threads left to screw it in, but that's a last resort. And this last time I managed to figure out, I tried something different and it worked, and I'm just going to simulate it here because this honestly is not even seized. So I'm just going to simulate it really quick and show you what worked for me on this last carb when this needle jet was severely seized. First part, of course, is just to same old solvent, ATF. You want it to seep in. Well, see, this one's not even seized. It went straight down. But you heat the body of this carburetor up with a hairdryer. Again, you wouldn't use a torch because of the solvent. And I wouldn't even use a heat gun because you don't want to get this aluminum body very hot. You just want to get it nice and hot to the touch. Aluminum is very conductive. It'll basically spread the heat evenly, very rapidly. But you'll find once you've heated this up with a hairdryer, this big brass jet holder will be even hotter than the aluminum, which is what you don't want. You want this to be much cooler than the surrounding aluminum. So aluminum will expand, the brass will shrink. Brass is way more conductive than steel. So as you're heating the aluminum, the smaller surface area of this brass will absorb that heat and get hotter than the aluminum. So what you want to do is you want to cool this brass nut down while keeping the aluminum fairly warm. And the way I did that was using this air duster stuff. When you turn it upside down, basically it's super cool stuff. The propellant, when it evaporates, gets extremely cold. And that's why you don't want to heat this aluminum housing up too much, because if you get this aluminum housing up to 100, 150 degrees and you spray this stuff on it, it's just going to crack the body. It's something you don't want to do. This is a last case scenario kind of thing. It's something I tried before I basically trashed the other carburetor and it worked. So I'm showing you how to do it here. Okay, after you've heated the aluminum body of the carb, you can see it's about 100 degrees. That brass is only slightly cooler. So now you take your propellant, your air can, Okay, once you've got some of your oil seeped down around that brass jet holder, then it's time to use your trusty impact wrench. Tap that on the top. And if you're lucky, it comes out just like that. There's also a couple of you want to try not to damage. There it comes. There it goes. Okay, that is basically the main jet stack. You got the main jet, screws into the main jet holder, and you got this atomizer, and then that fits down in there like that. And that's one of the O-rings you want to replace. Okay, the last part, all the jets are out, all the bolts are out. Last thing I'm going to take out is this butterfly valve. There's an O-ring basically on the brass shaft here that controls the butterfly valve. The problem is these two bolts that hold the butterfly valve on this shaft they're peened over. If you try to unscrew these bolts without grinding off these ends of these peened over bolts, you could probably damage the soft brass threads on that shaft. So you can use a file, sanding disc on a Dremel, or I'm going to use a Dremel with a kind of a metal shaping bit on here, kind of a carbon steel metal shaping thing, and basically I'm going to get in here and just use this to grind off the tops of these bolts. You know, I might as well do it. All right, here goes. Okay, finished. I skipped to the end. I basically hit the shaft a little bit, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't. You never see that part anyway. The part with the nuts, the bolt heads facing out, that's the part you see, and the butterfly valve never opens up like that anyway. Basically, that's closed. That's full open, closed, open. So now I'm just gonna shoot some penetrating oil on the heads of those bolts, set it up like that, penetrating oil, let the penetrating oil soak in, and see if those bolts come out easily, and hopefully they do. Okay, heat, penetrating oil didn't quite do the job. I got them loose I had to use the impact. Using the impact on this brass shaft is not a good thing to do, but basically I didn't have to hit the impact driver too hard, and mostly it's the shock that tends to get bolts loose. And these didn't require that much, but they are coming out. Turn sideways and gently pull and that one came out much easier than they usually do. Make a note the orientation. There's a little dot on the top there that faces out and it's on top. And then the shaft will come out, and there's your last O-ring. And honestly, this thing is turning to dust. I found this is usually the worst. Yeah, this is usually the worst O-ring, because nobody really wants to take this shaft out, and for a 40-year-old carburetor, it's got to be done. Actually, I found all these O-rings were really dry, cracked, broke easily. So what I'm going to do, all these parts are going to go in my ultrasonic cleaner, and then I'm going to blast all the passageways out with carburetor cleaner and compressed air. Place new O-rings on all the jets and the everywhere they go, and I'll start the process of rebuilding this carburetor now.